You ever have the wintertime slumps, or like maybe you're just looking at your pasty self, feeling a little down in the dumps, wondering like, is this it? So you go downstairs and you find that one thing that just cheers you up. You know, maybe it's a corgi with his little floofy face, little floaty butt in the pool. Or maybe it's like the trio of cats named Pancakes, Waffles, and Syrup. Those are mine. Anyway, there's one thing in your life that just makes you smile because you just know that they're there through thick and thin. It's like the constant in your life. You thought I'd say girlfriend. Well, I have some news for you. Anyway, I don't even want to talk about it, especially if you're in high school. There's a car out there that does that sort of thing. I'm Alex @FI on Instagram, and today we're going to be talking about a car that will always be there for you, like that girlfriend you probably accidentally took advantage of. A car that will pick you up from the late nights of you doing drunken debauchery things and take you home safely without breaking down on the way. It's a car your parents will love until you inevitably slam it right on the ground. The car that made Subaru, kind of, sort of, not the WRX, not the Outback, not even the STI trim. Oh no, ladies and gentlemen, today we're talking about you wanting to own a Subaru Legacy. And if you're just jumping into a Fitment Industries video, hola, welcome, all right? We do car videos and talk about things like wheels, tires, suspension. We're a very low commitment subscribe away from providing you a few laughs, okay? We talk about wheels, tires, and suspension. The first one was an ad lib. The second one's right there on fitmentindustries.com, and make one too many RuneScape references, which makes people uncomfortable. So we'll be switching it to Cartoon Network references until further notice. Mostly because I just started watching Dexter again when I got bored, and it's just very, very exciting, and it brings me back to my childhood. The Subaru Legacy, which takes after passing on great traditions, was born into the real world in 1989 to solely compete in the massive North America segment where competitors like Honda, Toyota, Mazda, and even Nissan were having massive success with their own little sedan vehicles, all right? They had the Accord, the Camry, the Stanza. The car from the bodyline styling was brand new for the Legacy, but used the tech and systems that made Subaru pretty much what they were already known for. Horizontally opposed engine, all-wheel drive option, and some pretty decent tech. And in all terms of the word, she ripped, bud. Set the 100,000 kilometer world record speed thing because they just wanted to show that it wasn't a slouch in the performance department. It's actually a pretty cool marketing ploy, and it did work a little bit. Then the car was used in the rally, and it slapped. Like, it did pretty damn good. It had the recipe for success, guys and gals. It did. It was so close. It was like that supercalifragilistic, expialidocious opportunity to get across the finish line, especially since it had the racing pedigree that was going along with it from Colin McRae. You're forever in your favor, all right? The Legacy initially, though, was, although quite the banger, it never really took off because the Legacy initially was quite the banger. So much so that Subaru knew that us Americans were, experimenting, you get what I'm saying, with tuner cars at the time, and I wanted to try and capitalize on that sort of experimental phase, kind of like college. So the US models, including the sports sedan and even the little touring wagon, they had like little sport trims, okay? The sporty and spacious sedan would come with another flagship piece that helped Subaru get away from their ugly middle school days, and that was the EJ22, which would ultimately become the EJ22T motor. And this thing was monstrous in its own right and ultimately became an iconic motor over time. It really is what made Subaru be known for in the future. Flat fours, baby, they're iconic, okay? You have $5,000 WRX, but if it's got that tone, it doesn't matter. You see, the more Subaru can make itself unique, the better. Imagine picking up a Subaru, which was then more expensive than any of the competition, and having to convince people it was worth it because of stuff. Subaru tried to give you those argument points with the Legacy, okay? Yeah, okay, bud, but it has all-wheel drive. What's your Corolla got? That was the argument. Yeah, I mean, it is a little funky, but the thing has a turbo. Where's your turbo, Karen? There is no turbo. This thing had a flat four, and most people didn't even know what that meant at the time. And this is where it started to get a little bit confusing for the Subaru Legacy name. It had single overhead cams, but it really also had some improvements over the non-turbocharged models. And this was important because the power that the car came with really helped it keep it competitive against everything else that was already out there. That permanently engaged four-wheel drive option was huge, especially for sales in the northern states like us. The reason the Legacy became so iconic was because it began to shift the imagery of Subarus being cheap, ugly, and, well, yeah, into reliable, you know, the proper vehicle that could compete with the big dogs. I mean, they were used to be marketed literally as cheap and ugly, so what do you really expect? Now, the first generation did well enough to warrant a second one, and that's exactly what they did. But let's be clear, it wasn't like they were blasting the doors off in sales or in marketing. In all honesty, they were doing subpar and pretty much both. They weren't really doing anything big enough to make a splash that made people convinced that the car was worth more than anyone else. It was priced at a premium, bud. People didn't want to pay no premium. All right, people wanted one, but not so much so that they'd, you know, swap their cheaper Japanese variant for it. You see, Subaru had a bit of an identity problem with the Subaru Legacy. They always kind of have until probably the last 2 decades. It didn't matter who they paid or what they did to promote the car, Subaru just never really figured it out. They accidentally insulted their purchasers at one point. They marketed against their own brand by accident at one point. And they couldn't compete against the big dogs as well as they initially thought because people were still very price conscious. Regardless of the marketing, Subaru just kept making the car because they just didn't care. The second generation would come onto the mark with the exterior design by a man named Oliver Boulay, coming with the taillights looking like the CVX and some more trims. The Subaru Legacy had a bigger motor, had some more sport to it, and of course it came in a wagon. This would be the time that Subaru would ultimately decide to switch and make their all-wheel drive system standard, which thank the Lord, because that is probably one of the biggest reasons you would ever even buy a Subaru in 1996. But early generations did come with a front-wheel drive model if you are looking around. You see, the Subaru Legacy 2.5 GT came out as a top-level model in 1996 to continue to offer a sports trim style car that kind of sort of appealed to that growing tuner market in the States. But Subaru was still doing it safely. They were like the Japanese Volvo, you know? It was Subaru. You could still shut down the streets and yell at pizza boys on a Friday night, but still end up taking your kid to soccer practice in the morning because why? Because it was a Subaru, and it's what you did with Subarus. The cars were decent, but a little bit weaker overall than the first generation in the engine department because the EJ25s have a tendency for internal head gasket issues. So you're gonna wanna be careful with that. Happens around 100,000 miles, not usually the best of things to deal with. If you're looking to buy one, that's the warning. Make sure that's done. Marketing still suffered because they just didn't know what to do with the car. And Subaru wasn't doing that great until a new agency finally figured out who truly bought supercars. Psych, Subaru cars. But what really saved this entire model was a little tiny trim known as the, what is it called? It's the guy with the knife. You know, he's got the knife. He always says, that's not a knife. This is a knife. You can't show this because I think YouTube doesn't like that. The Outback! The Outback had a full marketing push behind it with the good old Crocodile Dundee and ultimately pushed the Legacy Outback trim from a B-list player to an actual competitor. That paired with a newfound market strategy that catered to people that bought Subarus and you were successful. What was crazy about the Subaru Legacy is that it had a good recipe for success in the past. It had tech others didn't have. It had a styling that was unique to Subaru and it had some racing heritage behind it which started to show the world some W's instead of L's. But unfortunately, people just never really took to it until the Outback trim came out and would be okay with forking out more money than normal for a Japanese sedan. And on top of that, they were catering to an audience that actually met the needs of what the Legacy provided. The best trim to come out of the Legacy for people like you and people like me would be the 2.5 GT trim, which had all the bells and whistles that could possibly go for a tuner car. Even if you managed to snag a Spec B, which are pretty gnarly, you won the lottery. The 2.5 GT Spec B came with 250 horsepower, 5.3 second quarter mile, that's not true, and looked nothing like a car that would do those things. The Spec B would have the suspension of a WRX, manual transmission, and a torsion LSD. It was a WRX/STI in Legacy clothing, and boy, is it fun to look at, and it is probably one of the best sleepers you can buy. In all honesty, Volvo and Subaru share a lot of similarities in terms of having sleepers, but we're not here to talk about the history of the Legacy, poor little guy. We're here to talk about what it's like to own one of these bad boys. So you want to own a Subaru Legacy. Well, set down your Ambassador starter pack and grab your favorite G Fuel because we're about to talk about what it's like to own one of these things. We didn't mention the other generations because it starts to get just a little wonky and then they turn into normal cars at the future. All right, we're just gonna leave that alone. The first and second generations are pretty low key with not many people modifying them or spending too much money on them. Mostly you're worrying about the cars, same thing in this generation as you would any mid 80s or 90s cars. Rust and maintenance are the biggest thing. Now the fourth generation is where cars start to get a bit more popular in the modification scene. That's from 03 to 09. The 4th generation was probably the most hype experimental thing in their lineup, with it winning Japanese Car of the Year. It even won International Car of the Year, and it won an engine award for the EJ255 that was in it. Sounds like it had a bad story, but it won some awards, so that's good. It was sporty, it was good looking. Took lots of pieces from the WRX, and to this day, it actually isn't dated that badly. If you go look at that Legacy, they look pretty darn good, but they ain't perfect. Subaru Legacys have issues with turbo failures due to oil starvation and inherently lean stock tunes on the car. As with all other Subarus, you need to be aware of the valve cover gasket leaking, the crank pulley has issues with it, and something special in the throw-up bearing for some reason. These cars are a bit more finicky than most would want, kind of like that one, except actually Legacies are probably worse. So if you do jump into one, you just gotta be ready for that. A buddy of mine had one, Dustin, Korth. Rest in peace to your wallet, because I remember when that blew up, and that was not fun. But hey, you've got a GTI now, so I guess we learned our lessons. The wagons in this generation slap. You can throw some BC Racing coilovers in there, work wheels or otherwise, and some 225/40 tires, and pretty much be set for life with space, a fun driving experience, and a good looking car. They just require a little bit more of everything when it comes to maintenance and just upkeep, because they are more finicky. If you do, buy a wagon. Buy a wagon, just always buy a wagon. If you can get the Spec B, get the Spec B, but understand they can be a little bit weird and cause some damage to the old patience and probably the pocketbook. They look good, they behave well, they have all-wheel drive, so they still make sense for a fantastic daily. They're just a little bit like a toddler. Like when they behave, they're awesome. But when they start screaming while you're trying to have Panda Express in the mall because they don't like the color red for some reason, it becomes a strenuous experience. And that is how a Subaru Legacy do. So what do you think about the Subaru Legacy? Let us know in the comment section below. And of course, if you're looking for aftermarket wheels, tires, or suspension, be sure to hit us up over at fitmentindustries.com. If you have a slammed Legacy or Outback or lifted Outback or anything cool like that, add it to our gallery at fitmentindustries.com/add, because I would like to see more of those. I'm Alex from Fitment Industries. We will see you later. Peace.